I was standing in my garage, staring at a bicycle that hadn't been ridden in 5 years. It was Deborah's, a sleek, overpriced thing she bought during one of her short-lived healthy lifestyle phases. That particular phase had lasted exactly 3 weeks before she decided that cycling was too hard on her knees, which was a fascinating excuse considering she had no problem wearing heels high enough to require FAA clearance. But here I was, looking at this neglected bike like it had all the answers to my life's problems. Because it did. See, I hadn't thought about this bike in years. I had even forgotten we owned it. It had been shoved behind some old paint cans, a broken lawn chair, and one of those bulky air fryers that was supposed to change the way we cook, but instead became a glorified dust collector. But today, it was sitting right in the middle of the garage. I frowned. Now, there are very few situations in which a bicycle moves itself. Either one, Deborah had decided to revisit her cycling dreams, or two, someone else had moved it. And considering she once pulled a muscle just bending down to tie her shoe, I was leaning toward option two. I scanned the garage, looking for other signs of disruption. The rake had been moved from its usual spot. A step ladder was slightly askew. And most importantly, a strip of fresh paint on the wall was about 3 shades off from the rest of the garage, something only a man would do when he thought he was fixing something but was actually just creating a bigger problem. This wasn't my garage anymore. It had been tampered with. Now, I'm not a paranoid man. I'm not the type to see a missing sock and immediately assume espionage. But I also knew one thing for certain. Deborah wasn't the type to do manual labor. She once called me at work in a panic because she couldn't figure out how to replace the vacuum bag. The idea that she had suddenly taken it upon herself to reorganize the garage was about as likely as me deciding to take up ballet, which meant that someone else had been in my house. I walked over to the bike, crouched down, and noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The tires were dusty, sure, but not completely. There were streaks, like someone had wiped them down recently, but not thoroughly enough. And then I saw it. A single strand of blonde hair, tangled in the brake cable. Deborah's hair was brown. I exhaled slowly. All right, Timothy, I told myself. Don't jump to conclusions. Maybe Deborah has a blonde friend who borrowed the bike. Maybe this is just a simple misunderstanding. Maybe you're overthinking things. Except for one thing. Deborah doesn't have friends. At least, not the kind that would borrow her abandoned bicycle and give it a joyride around the neighborhood. Her idea of friendship involved meticulously curated social events where everyone pretended to be much wealthier and happier than they actually were. The kind of friendships where you don't sweat in front of each other, and you definitely don't ride secondhand bicycles. So, now I had a puzzle. A strange garage, a moved bicycle, and a hair that didn't belong to my wife. I stood up, dusted off my hands, and did what any self-respecting man would do in my situation. I went inside and made a sandwich. Not because I wasn't taking this seriously. Quite the opposite. A man cannot conduct a proper investigation on an empty stomach. Besides, I wasn't about to go stomping through the house demanding answers without some sort of game plan. That's how you end up looking like a fool in your own home. I sat at the kitchen table, chewing thoughtfully, and replayed the last few months in my head. Had Deborah been acting strange? Distant? Cold? The answer was yes, but not in an obvious, movie script way. There had been no dramatic arguments, no suspicious late-night calls. Just a general shift, a quiet indifference, like she had already made some kind of decision and was waiting for me to catch up. I put my sandwich down. The worst part? I wasn't even angry yet. I was just curious. What kind of person sneaks into another man's garage to adjust a bicycle and do a half-hearted paint job? Was this some sort of elaborate prank? Was I in the middle of a very specific home invasion? I needed proof. Something solid. And then, as if the universe wanted to make things extra easy for me, proof came knocking. Literally. A firm, confident knock at the front door. Now, people don't just knock anymore. They text first, or at the very least, they ring the doorbell. A knock, especially one like this, meant business. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and opened the door. There he was. Blonde. Tall. The kind of good-looking that only works on people who don't have real jobs. He was wearing a crisp button-down shirt, untucked just enough to look casual, but still expensive. And he had that air about him. The self-assured smirk of a man who had never had to return something because it was out of budget. He extended a hand like we were about to have a friendly chat over a beer. Hey man, he said smoothly. I think we should talk. I stared at him for a long moment, then down at his hand. And just like that, I knew. Not because of some grand confession. Not because I had found something incriminating on Deborah's phone. Not because I had caught them in the act. I knew because only a very specific kind of man knocks on your door, extends a handshake, and tells you that you should talk. And that man is the kind of man who has been in your garage. The blonde guy was still standing there, hand extended, looking at me like we were old college buddies catching up after a decade apart. I didn't shake it, mostly because I had a policy against shaking hands with people who had probably been in my house without my knowledge. Also, I didn't know where that hand had been, and given the circumstances, I had a strong suspicion it had been somewhere I didn't want to think about just yet. He dropped the handshake attempt like it was no big deal, shoved his hands into his pockets, and gave me a polite, expectant smile. "I'm Alex," he said. It was such a neutral, friendly name. It didn't fit. I was expecting something more dramatic, something more fitting of the situation. Like Dante, or Tristan, or maybe just guy who's been around my wife when I wasn't looking. I leaned against the doorframe. "Fantastic. You want a medal or something?" He grinned like I had just told the best joke he'd ever heard. The kind of grin that made me want to slam the door right in his face just to wipe it off. But I didn't, because I had a strong feeling that whatever this was, it was going to get interesting. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," Alex said, rocking back slightly on his heels. "Mind if I come in?" I did mind. In fact, I minded very much. But saying no would make it look like I was afraid of whatever he had to say. And if there was one thing I wasn't going to do, it was give this guy the satisfaction of thinking he had the upper hand. I stepped aside. "Knock yourself out." Alex walked in like he had been here before, which, at this point, I wasn't ruling out. He looked around the entryway, nodding like he was inspecting the place for a real estate listing. "Nice house," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It was a great find. Real good deal. Got it from a guy who wasn't sleeping with my wife." If the comment got to him, he didn't show it. Just let out a small chuckle and kept looking around like he was taking mental notes. I shut the door, crossed my arms, and waited. "So," I said, "you obviously didn't come here to borrow a cup of sugar. What's your deal?" Alex turned back to me, still perfectly calm, like this wasn't the most ridiculous situation in the world. "I figured you'd find out sooner or later," he said. "So I thought I'd be the one to tell you." I raised an eyebrow. "Tell me what? That you've been giving my wife motivational speeches in hotel rooms?" "Don't worry, I already got the memo." Another smirk. Another nod. He was way too comfortable, and it was really starting to irritate me. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page," he said. Oh, this was Rich. The guy who was sneaking around with my wife wanted to have a little sit-down discussion, like we were two business partners working out a minor contract disagreement. "Same page," I repeated. "All right. Let's see. You're sleeping with my wife. I'm standing here debating whether I should throw you out the window or just let you keep embarrassing yourself. Yeah, I'd say we're pretty caught up." Alex exhaled through his nose, still completely unbothered, like I was the one being irrational here. "I know this is awkward," he said. "Oh yeah, real awkward. Happens to me all the time. I let a guy into my house, and then he lets me know he's been making himself comfortable in other areas of my life. Classic situation. He ignored that, pressing on. "I just think it's better if we talk about this like adults." I stared at him. This was unreal. "You're explaining this like you just hit my car in a parking lot and want to swap insurance information," I said. "You realize that, right?" He shrugged. "Look, I get it. This isn't great for you. But the thing is," and this was the moment I knew that whatever came next was going to be something I really, really didn't want to hear. "The thing is," he continued, "I don't think Deborah's happy." I blinked. Then I laughed. A full, genuine laugh, because this was just too good. "You don't think she's happy," I repeated. "Well, thanks, Dr. Phil. If only I had an insightful, self-important random guy to diagnose my marriage sooner." Alex tilted his head slightly, the first hint of irritation finally creeping onto his face. "I'm just saying," he said. "This has been going on for a while." "Oh, fantastic," I said. "That makes it so much better. Long-term betrayal. Love that for me." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like I was the one making this difficult. "This isn't about rubbing it in your face," he said. "I wanted to be honest with you because I respect you." I nearly choked. "Oh, don't even start," I said. "You respect me? That's your angle?" "I do," he said. "I didn't want you to find out the hard way. I thought you deserved to hear it from me." I nodded slowly, crossing my arms. So let me get this straight, I said. You've been sneaking around behind my back, helping yourself to what isn't yours, and now you're standing in my house, telling me about it like you deserve a pat on the back for honesty? Alex had the audacity to look frustrated. You're being difficult, he said. Yeah, I am being difficult, I said. It's funny, I usually don't have this problem with the other men who sleep with my wife. Oh, wait. There aren't any other men, because normal people don't do this. Alex exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his suspiciously well-groomed hair. Look, Timothy, he said, finally dropping some of the fake charm. I get that this isn't ideal, but we both care about Deborah, all right? You love her and I held up a hand. Nope, don't finish that sentence. Not in my house. He shut his mouth, but the smugness never left his face. He thought he had this all figured out. He thought he was doing me a favor by being upfront. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a confession. It was a warning. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here to let me know that he wasn't going anywhere, that he had already won. And that was actually kind of funny, because Alex had no idea who he was dealing with. Alex was still standing there, arms crossed like he had just delivered a profound truth and was waiting for me to nod in solemn acceptance. Like I was supposed to shake his hand and thank him for personally updating me on my wife's extracurricular activities. I leaned back against the wall and stared at him. Really took my time. Studied him like he was some strange new species that had wandered into my house, confused about how natural selection worked. So let me get this straight, I said. You're here because you respect me. Yes. And because you care about Deborah. Of course. And because, in your infinite wisdom, you decided that the best way to handle this was to show up at my door and explain things like you're breaking bad news about my car insurance. His jaw tensed, just slightly. I just think it's better to be honest. Right? Yeah, super honest, I said. That's why you snuck around behind my back instead of, I don't know, sending me a thoughtful email titled, "Hey, just a heads up?" Alex exhaled sharply, like I was the one being unreasonable here. I didn't want it to happen this way, he said. That's funny, because I didn't want it to happen at all, I said. But hey, look at us. Life's full of surprises. His lips pressed together. He was starting to get annoyed, which was great, because I had been annoyed from the moment I opened the door, and it was only fair we were both miserable. Look, Timothy, he said, shifting his stance like he was about to launch into another one of his insightful monologues. This isn't easy for anyone. I know you're upset, but... I held up a hand. Let me stop you right there, Alex. I need you to do me a favor. He hesitated. What? Say literally anything else besides, I know you're upset. Alex's jaw clenched again, but he gave me a small, performative nod. Fair. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. I let it stretch. Let it get nice and uncomfortable. Then, just for fun, I motioned toward the couch. Have a seat, I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You want me to sit? Yeah, I said. Might as well get comfortable. Since, you're already making yourself at home. Alex hesitated, like he was trying to decide whether I was serious. Which I was. Sort of. Slowly, cautiously, he walked over and lowered himself onto the couch like it might explode on impact. I grabbed the chair across from him and sat down, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. All right, I said. Let's talk. Alex straightened his posture, looking relieved, like we had finally reached the rational discussion stage. Then I smiled. So, how long have you been this much of a fool? Alex's face twitched, and for the first time, I saw it, the tiniest crack in his carefully curated composure. I don't see how insults are going to help, he said. No, you don't, I said. That's the fun part. He exhaled slowly, probably counting to 10 in his head, like some meditation guru. Look, I get that you're angry. Nope, I interrupted. You already burned that line. Try a new one. Alex ran a hand through his hair and let out the kind of slow, exaggerated breath that people do when they want you to know they're being very patient with you. I understand that this is hard for you, he said. Oh, absolutely, I said. Really tough? Almost as tough as trying to figure out why some random guy has been adjusting the furniture in my garage. That made him blink. Your garage? Oh yeah, I said. See, I wasn't actually onto anything until you geniuses decided to remodel my storage area. But hey, maybe that was Deborah's way of helping me find out. Kind of like how you're helping me now, out of respect and all. Alex's fingers tapped against his knee. He had lost the upper hand, and he knew it. I let that sit for a second before tilting my head at him. You really thought this was going to go well, huh? I wasn't expecting a warm welcome, he said. Well, that's great, I said, because I wasn't expecting to find out my wife has been running an off-the-books social experiment with a local guy who wears expensive shirts for no reason. Alex opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he sighed, rubbing his temple like I was giving him a headache. I didn't come here to fight, he said. Oh, obviously, I said. You came here because you thought you were going to sit me down, explain things like we were on an after-school special, and I'd just nod along and say, wow. Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate your honesty. He frowned slightly. It's not like that. Then what's it like? I asked. Go on. Explain it to me. Enlighten me. Alex hesitated. Then, for the first time, he looked slightly uncomfortable. He started, then stopped. I narrowed my eyes. You what? He glanced away for a second, jaw tight. Then he looked back at me, and for the first time, his expression changed. Not smug. Not superior. Almost uncertain. Deborah told me you wouldn't care, he said finally. That was it. That was the thing. Not the affair. Not the sneaking around. Not even him standing in my house like he belonged here. That. She said what? Alex shifted slightly in his seat. She told me you two had been distant for a while. That you were more like roommates. That if I ever wanted to tell you, it wouldn't really matter, because you were already halfway checked out. I stared at him. Then, slowly, I leaned forward. Let me ask you something, I said. Do I look checked out to you? Alex looked at me for a long second. Then, quietly, he said, no. I nodded. That's what I thought. He exhaled, shifted his posture. Then, finally, his expression changed again. Because for the first time since he walked through that door, he realized something. Deborah had lied to both of us. Alex sat there, staring at me like he had just been informed that water was wet and gravity was still in effect. It was a new expression for him, somewhere between realization and mild indigestion. The confidence he walked in with had been knocked down a few pegs, which, honestly, was the only enjoyable part of this entire experience. So let's summarize, just to make sure we're both caught up, I said, folding my arms. You thought you were the special exception, the real guy in the story, the one she confided in, the one she trusted, the one she told the truth to. And now you're sitting in my living room, realizing you might have been just another conveniently managed inconvenience. Alex exhaled through his nose, staring at the floor for a second before rubbing his jaw. This isn't how I expected this conversation to go. Oh, you expected something? I said. Well, now I gotta know, how exactly did you picture this playing out? He sighed and leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, man. I thought. I don't know. That's a lot of not knowing for someone who felt comfortable enough to walk into another man's house and explain why he's been borrowing his wife. Alex clenched his jaw again, like he wanted to argue but couldn't figure out where to start. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. She told me you weren't really in this anymore, he said after a moment. That you two were just going through the motions. That she didn't even think you'd care. Yeah, we covered that already, I said. But here's the part one find fascinating. You believed her. Alex looked at me, brow slightly furrowed. Tell me, Alex, I said. Was there a single moment, just one, where you stopped and thought, maybe the woman cheating on her husband isn't the world's most reliable source of information? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Right, I said. Didn't think so. He shifted in his seat. I mean, I wanted to believe her. That's adorable, I said. And so incredibly fool. Alex sighed again and ran both hands down his face. He was finally starting to look genuinely uncomfortable, which was a nice change from the cool, smug approach he came in with. Look, he said, shaking his head. I didn't plan on this happening. I didn't go into this trying to screw someone over. Well, congratulations, I said. You managed to do it completely by accident. He gave me an annoyed look, but didn't argue. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, watching him. The guy was clearly processing some things in real time, which, honestly, was kind of fun to watch. So what happens now? He finally asked. I laughed. That's your question? You show up to my house to personally inform me that you've been contributing to my marriage's early demise, and now you're asking me what happens next. He shrugged slightly. I mean, you don't seem like the type to just let this go. You got that right, I said. Alex exhaled and leaned back against the couch. Look, man, I don't know what to tell you. I screwed up. I get that. I just thought. No, see, that's the part I'm still stuck on, I said, standing up. You thought. That's the problem. You thought this was a good idea. You thought you were handling this in some honorable way. And most importantly, you thought you were the only one she was lying to. Alex looked up at me, his expression shifting slightly. What do you mean? I let out a breath, shaking my head. You're a smart guy, Alex. At least, I assume you are, based on how confidently you walked in here. So let me ask you this. Why are you so sure that you were the only other person involved? That made him blink. He sat up straighter, his face unreadable. What are you saying? I'm saying, I said, that if Deborah was willing to sneak around behind my back, what makes you think she wasn't doing the same thing to you? Alex didn't answer right away. And that, honestly, was answer enough. He stood up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't think she would. I raised an eyebrow. You don't think? He hesitated. No, but you're not sure. He exhaled sharply and turned slightly, pacing a few steps. His carefully constructed certainty was starting to crack, and I was more than happy to keep chipping away at it. Tell me something, Alex, I said. When you weren't with her, when you weren't texting or calling or whatever it is you two did, where was she? He turned back to me, his expression guarded. What are you implying? I'm asking, I said. Where was she? He didn't answer. I nodded. Exactly. Alex ran a hand down his face. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring off into the middle distance like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head. Look, I don't. He stopped, shook his head, then tried again. I know she cares about me. That's cute, I said. You also knew she was telling the truth. See how that worked out? Alex clenched his jaw. He was getting frustrated, and honestly, I didn't blame him. He had walked in here thinking he was in control of the situation, and now he was realizing he had absolutely no idea what kind of mess he had stepped into. I let that realization settle in for a second before tilting my head. Do you even know where she is right now? Alex blinked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. I mean, since we're all being so honest with each other, I continued. You're standing in my house, talking to me about this. Where's Deborah? Alex glanced at the floor. Don't do that. I interrupted. Don't stall. Answer the question. He exhaled. She said she had a work thing. I nodded. Right. And let me guess. No further details. No specific location. Just a vague work thing that conveniently doesn't require her to be in contact for the next few hours. Alex didn't say anything. I smiled. Alex, I said, you absolute, magnificent moron. He looked at me, and I could see it. The moment the thought finally landed. The moment he realized that he might not be the only guest star in this ridiculous soap opera. She wouldn't, he started. But there was no conviction behind it. No certainty. And that was the best part. She might not, I said with a shrug. Or she might. But the fun thing about people who lie is that once they start, it's hard to tell where the truth even begins. Alex ran both hands down his face. I clapped him on the shoulder. Hey, look on the bright side, I said. At least you're finally catching up. Alex let out a long, slow breath. He looked exhausted. He looked frustrated. And most importantly, he looked unsure, which meant this whole conversation had been completely worth it. Alex stood there like someone had just unplugged him from the wall. The man came into my house with all the confidence of a motivational speaker at a wellness retreat, and now he looked like he was questioning every decision he had ever made. It was beautiful. I need to talk to her, he muttered. Oh, absolutely, I said. You should definitely call her and ask if she's cheating on you, too. I'm sure she'll be just as honest with you as she was with me. Alex clenched his jaw but didn't argue. He pulled out his phone, stared at it for a second like it was suddenly an unfamiliar object, then tapped out a message. I leaned back against the wall, watching him. You know, this is actually kind of refreshing, I said. I don't think I've ever had a conversation like this before. Usually, when a guy's sleeping with my wife, he doesn't introduce himself like he's running for office. Alex ignored me, staring at his screen. She's not answering. Shocking. He exhaled, rubbing his face. Oh, don't do that. I interrupted. Don't act all conflicted now. You were very sure of yourself when you walked in here. I was sure, Alex snapped, looking up. Because I trusted her. I gave him a long, slow nod. Yeah, me too. We let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I clapped my hands together. All right. So, what now? Alex glanced at me, eyes wary. What do you mean? I mean, What's your next move, champ? You walked in here expecting to lay down some truth and walk away the bigger man. But now, you're looking a little lost. He didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around his phone. I need to talk to her, he repeated. I grinned. Yeah, you said that already. But here's the thing. You really think she's going to pick up your call while she's busy? Let's say, networking with whoever else she's been keeping in the rotation. Alex's eyes darkened. He hated that thought. Good. He was getting a tiny taste of the lovely reality sandwich I had been force-fed earlier. I'll find her, he muttered. Oh, absolutely, I said. And when you do, I'd love to hear how she explains this one. Maybe she'll say she was doing some deep psychological research. Maybe she'll claim she was trying to test your trust. Alex scrolled through his phone aggressively, like he was trying to will her into responding. Meanwhile, I was already 2 steps ahead. See, most guys in my situation would be planning some kind of dramatic confrontation. Maybe a shouting match, maybe some kind of grand speech. But me? No. I had a much better idea. Because if there's one thing I knew about Deborah, it was this. She hated being embarrassed. And what's worse than losing control of your own narrative? I pulled out my own phone and started typing. Who are you texting? Alex asked, glancing up. Oh, just a few friends, I said casually. His brow furrowed. Why? I smirked. Because if Deborah wants a secret life, let's make it a public one instead. I hit send. Alex stared at me. What did you do? Oh, nothing crazy, I said. Just sent a little message to a few people. You know, people who know her. People who really like gossip. Alex's mouth opened slightly. You? Oh, come on, Alex, I said. Did you really think I was going to sit here quietly while you two pranced around like you were starring in some tragic romance novel? Nah, I'm making this everyone's business. Alex looked panicked. Dude, that's what? I cut in. Petty? Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I love it. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, then frowned. Why is Deborah's sister texting me? I laughed. Because I CC'd her. Alex paled. You what? Oh yeah, I said. She's on the distribution list. So's Deborah's boss. And a couple of her coworkers. And, oh, let's not forget her book club. You know, the one where they spend more time drinking than actually reading. Alex was visibly panicking now. You don't have to do this. Oh, but I do, I said cheerfully. Because you and Deborah? You both made me part of something I didn't agree to. So now, I'm just returning the favor. Alex's phone buzzed again. He stared at the screen, his face getting redder by the second. She's freaking out, he muttered. Of course she is, I said. She just lost control of the situation. And the best part? She knows it. Alex exhaled sharply, then turned and made for the door. Where are you going? I called after him. To talk to her, he said without looking back. I grinned. Good luck with that. The door shut behind him. And just like that, I felt fantastic. Now, was this the most mature way to handle things? Absolutely not. But was it effective? Oh, you bet. Because Deborah didn't care about hurting me. She didn't care about the betrayal. But she did care about her image. And now, that image was crumbling. I pulled up my phone again and sent one last message. This one went directly to Deborah. Smile. Everyone knows now. See you soon. And then I sat back and waited. Deborah took exactly 20 minutes to show up. I knew because I was watching the clock while casually going through my emails, pretending that her entire world wasn't currently imploding. The fun part was that I hadn't even gotten creative with my message. No embellishments, no dramatic storytelling. Just the facts. A simple, effective, here's what your wife has been up to mass notification sent to a handful of people who really enjoyed passing information along. And Deborah? She hated not being in control of her own story. When the front door burst open, I didn't even look up. You humiliated me, she shrieked. Yeah, I said, scrolling. That was kind of the point. She stood there, breathing heavily, looking like she had sprinted here, which she probably had. Her usually flawless hair was out of place, her shirt was wrinkled, and her eyes had that manic, desperate energy of someone trying to put out a fire with a garden hose. This is so childish, she snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done? I finally set my phone down and met her eyes. Oh, I think I do. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Do you even know how stupid this makes you look? People are going to think. People are going to think what, Deborah? I interrupted. That you're a liar? A cheater? That you treated your husband like a moron while parading around with other men behind his back? She pressed her lips together so hard they practically disappeared. I leaned back, folding my arms. Which part are you actually mad about? That people know the truth, or that you're not the one who got to tell it? Her jaw clenched. You had no right to do this. Right, I said. Because you were really big on respecting rights when you were sneaking around with Alex. Or whoever else was lucky enough to make the roster. Her hands balled into fists. This is our marriage, Timothy. This isn't anyone else's business. Oh, that's adorable, I said. You suddenly care about our marriage? I never wanted it to go this way, she shot back. I scoffed. Oh, so you had a different plan for how I was supposed to react? What was it? You were going to gradually introduce the idea of you sleeping with other men until I finally shrugged and said, You know what, Deb? That sounds reasonable. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I was going to tell you. I smirked. Yeah, I bet you were. Her nostrils flared. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like I'm the bad guy here. Oh wow, I said, widening my eyes. Are you not the bad guy? Please, tell me more about how you accidentally tripped and fell into multiple betrayals. Her face was turning red now. You're being insufferable. Oh, I hope so, I said. Because you've been exhausting. She threw her hands in the air. Fine. You want to know why, Timothy? Why I did this? I gestured. Oh, please, enlighten me. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, then looked me in the eye. Because I was bored. I blinked. She lifted her chin slightly. Yeah, that's right. Bored. You want the truth? There it is. Our life was predictable. The same routine. The same conversations. And I needed more. I let that hang in the air for a second. Then I burst out laughing. Deborah's face twisted in fury. This isn't funny. Oh, but it is, I said between laughs. Because do you hear yourself? You think this is a Netflix subscription? You got bored, so you what? Found a new show to binge. Her eyes burned into me. You weren't paying attention to me anymore. I wiped a fake tear from my eye. Deb, that's hilarious. Because you know who was paying attention to you? Everyone in that group chat I just created. Her mouth fell open. You wouldn't. I wiggled my phone. Oh, but I did. She lunged forward, reaching for it. I pulled it back casually. Nope, I said. You don't get to control the damage control. Her breathing was erratic now. Timothy, you need to fix this. I raised an eyebrow. I need to fix this. Her voice dropped to a pleading tone. You don't understand. This could ruin me. I tilted my head. And she blinked rapidly, like the word confused her. And I leaned in. And I don't care. She stared at me, as if the concept was completely foreign. See, Deborah, you stopped being my problem the second you decided I wasn't yours, I said. You wanted more? Congrats. You got more than you bargained for. She shook her head, scrambling. We can salvage this. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, Deb. Sweetheart. Darling. I gestured between us. There is nothing left to salvage. Panic flared in her eyes. We can. Nope, I interrupted. We should at least. Nope. Her jaw tightened. You can't just walk away from this. I gave her a slow, satisfied grin. Oh, Deborah. Watch me. She started to say something else, but I was already walking past her, grabbing my keys, and heading for the door. Where are you going? She demanded. I opened the door and glanced back. To celebrate. And with that, I stepped outside, took a deep breath of fresh air, and shut the door behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt fantastic. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel